deep in the Bavarian Alps in the spring of 1945, as the Third Reich violently collapsed into ruin, a high-ranking German military intelligence officer quietly buried steel microfilm cylinders in the damp earth of a remote mountain meadow. He was not burying these records to hide them forever, nor was he attempting to destroy evidence of his regime's unfathomable atrocities against millions of innocent people. Instead, he was deliberately constructing a meticulously calculated resume that he intended to hand directly to the conquering American military forces. The buried files contained the most comprehensive intelligence network ever assembled on the Soviet Union, carefully curated by a man who had spent years operating at the very pinnacle of Adolf Hitler's war machine. For decades, the American public was taught a comforting historical narrative that justice had been entirely uncompromising at Nuremberg, and that the architects of the Nazi nightmare had been thoroughly purged from the post-war global order. But the buried cylinders held a dark currency that would quietly buy the survival of some of the worst war criminals in human history, fundamentally challenging everything we thought we knew about the origins of the Cold War. The man who orchestrated this subterranean insurance policy was Major General Reinhard Gehlen, the ruthless commander of Fremdheerost, or Foreign Armies East, the premier intelligence apparatus of the German General Staff on the Eastern Front. Gehlen had overseen a vast and brutal network of spies, interrogators, and informants across Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, extracting information through methods that routinely involved torture and the intentional mass starvation of prisoners of war. As it became mathematically certain that Germany would lose the conflict, Gehlen recognized a shifting geopolitical landscape long before the final shots were fired in the bunkers of Berlin. He understood that the fragile alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union was destined to fracture, and that when the inevitable hostility erupted, Washington would suddenly find itself desperately blind behind enemy lines. He surrendered to the United States Army Counterintelligence Corps with an audacious proposition, offering to transfer his entire intact espionage network, complete with its deep cover assets and extensive archives, directly over to American control. This staggering offer was not met with the revulsion or immediate prosecution that one might expect following a global war fought to eradicate the very regime Gehlen served so effectively. Instead, senior American intelligence officials, deeply anxious about the looming specter of Soviet expansion and severely lacking their own assets behind the Iron Curtain, saw an irresistible strategic opportunity. Men like Allen Dulles, who would later become the powerful civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency, realized that rebuilding an intelligence network from scratch in a paranoid, tightly controlled Soviet state could take decades they simply did not have. Consequently, they struck a deeply classified and morally devastating pact with the defeated general, agreeing to fund and protect his organization while actively shielding its members from international war crimes tribunals. The geopolitical stakes were considered so catastrophically high that the architects of American foreign policy willingly blinded themselves to the blood on the hands of the men they were hiring, raising a terrifying question about the true cost of national security. By 1946, the newly christened Gehlen Organization was operating out of a heavily guarded compound in Pulich, Germany, fully funded by American taxpayers and operating under the absolute protection of the United States military establishment. What began as a seemingly pragmatic, albeit deeply cynical, military exchange quickly metastasized into an extensive shadow agency heavily populated by unrepentant former SS, SD, and Gestapo officers. Men who had actively orchestrated the Holocaust, managed mobile killing squads, and operated extermination camps were suddenly rebranded as crucial anti-communist freedom fighters, given clean identities, and placed on the American government payroll. The United States government, entirely aware of the horrific backgrounds of their new clandestine assets, actively assisted in their evasion of justice, manipulating diplomatic records and providing logistical cover to ensure their most productive spies were not hanged at Nuremberg. As this toxic alliance deepened, the American intelligence apparatus became dangerously dependent on a cabal of war criminals who possessed their own deeply entrenched ideological agendas, feeding Washington information that was frequently manipulated to serve their own survival. The reliance on Gelän's compromised network produced disastrous consequences that actively destabilized the early Cold War and severely manipulated American foreign policy in the process. Desperate to justify their continued funding and secure their impunity, Gelän's operatives frequently fabricated intelligence reports, wildly exaggerating the immediate military capabilities and aggressive intentions of the Soviet Union. This manufactured paranoia deliberately fed into the darkest fears of the Pentagon and the CIA, directly contributing to the rapid escalation of the nuclear arms race and the massive militarization of Western Europe. Furthermore, the Gelän organization itself was catastrophically compromised by Soviet double agents, most notably Heinz Felf, a former SS officer turned KGB mole who systematically betrayed dozens of CIA operations and Western assets directly to Moscow. The American intelligence community had struck a Faustian bargain, selling its moral authority for an illusion of security, only to find itself thoroughly manipulated by the very fascists it had conquered and the communists it was attempting to destroy. For more than half a century, the profound depths of this collaboration remained entirely submerged beneath the highest classifications of state secrecy, vehemently denied by the intelligence establishment whenever uncomfortable rumors surfaced in the press. It was not until the passage of the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act in 1998 that the American public finally gained access to millions of pages of declassified CIA, FBI, and Army files that exposed the breathtaking scale of the betrayal. The documents unequivocally confirmed that Washington had not merely turned a blind eye to a few questionable informants, but had systematically absorbed an entire hierarchy of the Nazi terror apparatus into its own intelligence infrastructure. The records detailed how American handlers explicitly discussed the war crimes of their assets, dismissing their atrocities as irrelevant historical footnotes in the face of the overwhelming Soviet ideological threat. This deliberate historical amnesia allowed individuals who had engineered the murder of millions to live out their days in quiet prosperity, protected by the very nation that had loudly proclaimed itself the ultimate arbiter of global justice. The unsealing of these archives forced a profoundly uncomfortable reevaluation of the foundational myths surrounding the aftermath of the Second World War and the moral superiority loudly claimed by the West during the Cold War. The architects of this clandestine alliance justified their decisions as necessary evils in a battle for the survival of the free world, arguing that clean hands are an unaffordable luxury in the shadowy realm of global espionage. Yet, the legacy of the Gelän organization reveals a catastrophic institutional rot, demonstrating how the singular pursuit of geopolitical advantage can effortlessly corrode the democratic values a nation purportedly exists to defend. The consequences of empowering these men rippled through decades of foreign policy, establishing a terrifying precedent that the end will always justify the means, no matter how grotesque those means might be. We are left to grapple with the disturbing reality that the modern intelligence apparatus was built, in no small part, upon the bloody foundations laid by the most destructive totalitarian regime of the 20th century. When a nation builds its defenses using the architects of a nightmare, can the institutions they help construct ever truly be free of that original darkness? The compromises made in the aftermath of the Second World War suggest that the line between righteous defense and moral surrender is far thinner than we are comfortable admitting to ourselves. We have to ask ourselves if the intelligence structures operating in the shadows today are still guided by that same chilling philosophy of absolute pragmatism. Let us know down in the comments where you believe the line should be drawn when national survival is supposedly on the line. If you want to keep examining the uncomfortable truths that have been deliberately erased from the official record, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next investigation.